trafficking is still happening, and I'm delighted to introduce Hilary, Vice President of Methodist Women of Great Britain, to bring us up to date. Over to you, Hilary.
And thank you very much. It's really good to be here, and I feel I should say right at the start that I come to this topic as a person who is interested, but I'm certainly no sort of expert in the field. But I became interested in the scourge of human trafficking several years ago now, when a number of events occurred in close succession, which seemed to come to my attention. And so I started to do a bit of research to find out more, and was quite horrified really at the extent of it and the horrific things that go on within the field of human trafficking. And so when I became President of Methodist Women in 2019, it seemed an opportunity to be able to have some opportunities to help raise the awareness about the issues involved. And bringing the resolution to National Council of Women has been part of that journey. And that resolution, as I think most of you know, was accepted earlier this year. And so this is the resolution calling upon the government to instigate greater data gathering to be able to better assess the prevalence of human trafficking and human slavery across the UK, and at the same time to rapidly improve and increase the facilities to be able to support those who are rescued and who have been traumatized by their experiences. When we think about modern slavery, that term is an umbrella term which encompasses many forms of exploitation and includes what we now call human trafficking. And it can include all sorts of things: forced labor, things like people forced to wash people's cars and kept in horrific accommodation. It can involve prostitution, it can involve domestic servitude, and forced organs and various other things, as well as the trafficking of drugs. And you may be aware of what's now called county lines drug trafficking, which exploits lots of young people, some as young as 8 or 9. So it's something which affects the most vulnerable in society. So those who are poor, who are living in difficult circumstances, those who are vulnerable in any way, are most prone to become trafficked. It is very much a hidden crime, sometimes hidden in plain sight. And so one needs to be aware of what to look out for to be able to spot what's going on. And it's very high on the agenda for the United Nations. It is one of their Sustainable Development Goals to bring an end to forced labor and human trafficking. There's some of the basic facts about it. It's right across the world. It's in every single country in the world. A conservative estimate is that around 40 million men, women, and children are trapped in various ways in modern slavery. But some estimates go as high as 46 million people, and it's growing. It is the second greatest criminal activity across the world after drug trafficking, and there is some overlap between human trafficking and drug trafficking. And in the UK, it's been something that has been growing quite significantly over recent years. Data collection is quite difficult, simply because so much of what happens is hidden behind closed doors. So the gathering of data to really know the amount of the problem is at a very early stage in this country. In 2020, the Office of National Statistics published a report which gathered together as much data as they could to give information about the different aspects of human trafficking and to help to understand all the issues of the problems. So it gathered together as much as they could from a range of sources, but those sources such as charities and the national reporting mechanism all gather information through different systems, which means that the data cannot be compared adequately or reliably. And so the information that's gathered only gives a general level of awareness. And so it's very hard to get a clear picture of just how prevalent the issues are. I happened to know a young woman who was responsible for getting that report put together. And I know that the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, were hoping to do a further report by now. But I had a conversation with her a few weeks ago, and she tells me that they are having tremendous difficulty in getting information currently out of the Home Office. So the report will not be happening for a while yet, I think. In addition, a lot of the victims are not self-aware. They're not necessarily aware that they have been exploited and trafficked in the situations that they're in. And if they are brought to a situation of being rescued from their current placement, not all of them will be willing to be helped because they have been so inculcated with the view to be frightened of any form of authority, and so they shy away from it as much as they possibly can. So in 2018, the data that was available found that there had been 6,985 possible victims through the UK, and that was via the National Referral Mechanism. 23% of those were British nationals, which was a 36% increase on the previous year. And of that 36%, 48, nearly half of them, were under 18 years. Now that may well signify the extent to which the county lines drug trafficking has been increasing in this country.
Certainly has in Hereford.
Every year since, the records that are available suggest that all of the aspects of human trafficking have been increasing, particularly domestic servitude, people kept in houses, forced to look after the residents there in all sorts of ways, often barely fed and not provided with anywhere for themselves, such as a bed or anywhere to keep any belongings they might have. So there are many stories of them sleeping in cupboards or sleeping on the floor in the kitchen, for example. The Salvation Army are a significant player as a charity in supporting victims that are identified, and 2,251 victims were helped by them up to the year of June 2019. And of that number, nearly half had experienced labour exploitation and 39% sexual exploitation of one form or another. Mm. So you can see already that there are some challenges in trying to measure the level of modern slavery across our country. Back in 2014, which is quite a while ago now, it was estimated by the Home Office that between 10 and 13,000 potential victims were in the UK. But subsequently, the methods used to gather data have been changed. The data sources are now different. It was recognized that there's too much reliance on administrative data and the statistical model that was used rather than the actual information that was available. And then in 2018, in July, the Walk Free Foundation produced a global slavery index, and they estimated that there were around 136,000 modern slavery victims across the UK, which is quite a significant difference.
Yeah.
So then in 2009, there was some recognition by the government that the problem is there and is growing. And so the National Referral Mechanism, the NRM, was introduced. And the intention was that it would give a framework to be able to identify victims. But any data that's gathered through that is not included as part of the gathering of data for a national statistic.
Yes.
I'm not sure why. And the changes that have been made to various categories by the Home Office over recent years do not align with the analysis of data that preceded that. So again, it's really difficult to make comparisons and have a true picture of what's going on. But in 2018, 45% of referrals that were made to the National Referral Mechanism were of under 18-year-olds. And when people are referred to the NRM, the adults have a choice about whether they will be helped or not, but the under 18s are regarded as children, and so they are not required to give their consent, and they are automatically transferred for whatever help may be available. I asked my friend, I wasn't clear about the process involved when people are identified or are rescued from human trafficking. And this is what her department came up with. And she herself said she's not sure that this is a totally comprehensive picture of what actually happens, but it's as close as I've managed to get. So there are first responders, people who work for approved charities or organisations, such as the Salvation Army and a range of other charities. And they can, when they identify somebody and find somebody who has obviously been rescued from some form of trafficking, they need to refer them to the National Referral Mechanism. That referral goes to the Home Office, to the police, and to the Crime Prevention Service. And those three bodies share any intelligence that they have, any history that they have about individuals, any data that they have about where the people have come from or their past history, and so on. And once they've gathered as much information as they can, they look at each individual, and it's the Home Office that then decides if their case is reasonable in terms of having been trafficked, or whether it's conclusive in terms of they have actually been trafficked and they are therefore to be referred on for the help that's available. Through that process between the Home Office, the police, and the Crime Prevention Service, there can also be data sharing with other organisations, such as the National Crime Agency, Gang Masters, and the Labour Abuse Authority, because they sometimes have more information there. Then when the victims have been identified and the level of recognition has been agreed, then they are referred to usually the Salvation Army as adults. But in Scotland, the system is different. There it's known as a Traffic Awareness Raising Alliance or Migrant Help. And in Ireland, they go to Migrant Help or to Women's Aid. But as I said, for children, the system is different again. And there is an independent child trafficking guardians organisation, which is run by Barnardo's and is sponsored by the Home Office. So the children then are given support to be able to navigate through the criminal justice system, through immigration and through social care systems. But I should say that it's not just the agencies and the charities that can refer. Anybody, any individual can refer on anybody that they find or suspect may be in a traffic situation. And there is a free 0800 number that you can call. Or there are various charities who have systems such as Stop the Traffic, have an app that you can have on your phone and you can refer through straight away through their online system, and you can be quite anonymous in that situation. So if we move on then to think about the victims themselves, most, if not all, are very traumatized when they are rescued. They are in need of physical, mental, and emotional support. And for many of them, they are so traumatized that they are unable to talk about their experiences immediately or to give any evidence about what has happened to them. And you have to remember that for many of them, they may have been kept in a situation where they don't know where they are. If they have been brought in from abroad rather than transferred from somewhere within our own country, they may not have the language. They're also, as I've said, usually frightened of authority, and they have had some horrific experiences of abuse and physical, mental, and psychological often. And for many of them, it will take a very, very long time to actually come to terms with what's happened and be able to start to build a new life. There are refuges and support facilities available around the country, but there aren't enough. The facilities are inadequate, and many of them are not able to provide sufficient trauma counselling and support for the victims to be able to recover well. So many end up being referred back to the Home Office without being given any support. And this means that in cases of women and children especially, they are extremely vulnerable to being exploited and trafficked again and suffering in some other way. And you have to remember too that many of the victims have had all identification taken from them by those who have trafficked them. They take away any passports or identification that they may have. Anything that is personal, they restrict from them and do not let them have it back. So again, it just multiplies the fear that they have at being in that situation. The criminal justice system tries to help. They have law enforcement agencies and prosecutors who work closely together to build cases, trying to build perpetrators to justice. But many of the cases involve multiple offences and many, many victims as well. So it cuts across many jurisdictions and is a very complex process. There is an ongoing monitoring of cases, and the NRM particularly are helping to build a picture of what slavery looks like and to support the development of a national and international strategy to reduce the offences and hopefully one day to eliminate them. But when you try to compare data from this country and even across Scotland and Ireland into cases across Europe, the bases, the systems that they use to put the data together are all different. So it can't be compared reliably, which is one of the really big problems. And so again, the data from the criminal justice system does not adequately reflect the level of modern slavery across this country. Another slight problem is that the Criminal Prosecution Service does flag up modern slavery cases, but it would appear that the flags on their cases that they hold are not necessarily applied correctly, and that the flags on the files can remain even when charges have been amended or dropped. So again, it skews the data that is available. So Bernard Silverman, in a report of his from March 2020, said this: "If we're to fight slavery effectively, an evidence-based approach is crucial. Academic, NGO and government research all have essential roles to play in informing the policies and practice that underlie this vital effort." And so it's became obvious to me, at least, that effective and reliable data collection is absolutely crucial if government are to be pressured to respond and to improve the practices. It's also necessary that public awareness is raised, because if people are unaware of what's going on, they are not likely to do anything to help to reduce the problems. And the training of the services, such as the police, needs to be something which is ongoing, so that they recognise when they come across situations where there are difficulties. So I think we need to try and pressure government and agencies involved to establish some method of data collection which is reliable and quantifiable across all parties, because the times that we live in, evidence is one of those things which is required for so many aspects of our lives. The government might consider setting up a team that's dedicated to prosecuting the perpetrators of modern slavery and human trafficking. There are teams in Ireland and in parts of Europe, and I know that Dame Sarah Thornton, the Anti-Trafficking Commissioner, met a little while ago with members of banks and significant organisations in Europe, trying to look at a system that might be effective across all the countries, really. And there was a recommendation for a role of a rapporteur who would be an independent employed person who would liaise with agencies like the National Referral Mechanism and the Home Office to help together better data. So the recognition of victims and the length of time in recovery then needs to be built in, because these people who have been rescued from trafficking are in a bad situation. And the accommodation that they are put into once they are recovered is not always as good as it might be, unfortunately. When we think about other measures that may help this process to reduce human slavery, there is currently a requirement for commercial businesses that have an annual turnover of, I think it's 36 million, to report annually about their supply chains and whether there could be instances of people trapped in modern slavery who are working in their supply lines. But this is not currently enforced. And a lot of the firms who are supposed to do this If they do it at all, they see it as a box-filling exercise, seemingly. And so again, it's there is room for improvement, shall we say. Dame Sarah Thornton did make 5 recommendations to the financial services sector back in September of last year, saying that the financial services sector needs to integrate modern slavery and human trafficking risks into the way that they approach their businesses, in the same way that they approach environmental risks. But I think one of the comments I read was that the environmental risk actually has less impact on the financial increases than does human trafficking. I'll say no more. If you remember back last year, there was a G7 meeting in Carbis Bay, and one outcome of that meeting was that an open letter went to the government calling for action regarding forced labour and asking for an agreement for greater collaboration. Since I put the resolution to National Council of Women, you may be aware that the Nationality and Borders Bill has been going through Parliament. And one of the comments that Dame Sarah Thornton made was, it is alarming that the Nationality and Borders Bill is set to degrade the existing protections for these victims, even while the government works to improve support for others. And you may be aware that the bill has had significant concerns raised about it in terms of making it much harder to identify modern slavery victims, the potential for it to increase the vulnerability to trafficking, and it's the thought that it is very unlikely that migrants and so on will stop putting their trust in traffickers and smugglers because they are so desperate to reach safety and sanctuary. So the bill is highly unlikely to reduce the problem that is perceived by some in this country. And again, those who are trying to come into our country who have had a 12-month prison sentence will not automatically be given support under the National Referral Mechanism, which again could significantly undermine the ability to bring traffickers to justice, because some of those people will have been exploited, and that was the reason that they ended up being in prison, really through no fault of their own. So there's a little bit of the background to how we came to this resolution. There it is again, to just remind you what we said. And I'm now going to hand over to Delphine, who is going to share some of her local information and bring us down to earth, really.
Well, I'm just the follower on, just for a few moments. Yeah, good. And as Hilary mentioned, this has kind of grown a bit like Topsy. It started off as a resolution, which we sent in April last year. And because there wasn't a conference that year, it's rolled on, and here we are doing our bit. And thank you, Hilary. That was brilliant. I loved it, because I think you've probably put in some exercise that I hadn't seen before, so that was lovely. So I'm just going to read you what I had originally written, and then just add a little bit of personal perspective of what's going on here in Cumbria. I said, I support this resolution from Methodist women in Britain on behalf of all those rescued, still being held, or trafficked into modern slavery. I praise the action of all organisations who work to identify, save and support victims of modern slavery in the UK. The Salvation Army has already been mentioned, which was awarded a major government contract to support and lead on anti-trafficking, and that was given 11 years ago, and which produces each year vital and detailed reports, not only on statistics gathered for those folks that they actually come in contact with, but also the personal stories of those rescued from trafficking. And some of them are quite harrowing, actually. You can go onto their website and actually see the latest report if you wish. I'm personally aware that the Salvation Army and the Methodist Church in my county, amongst others, have members acting as couriers and providing safe houses and support and caring for those trafficked. Yet this is only a small part of the picture. And as Hilary has said, there are greater needs, and it is what is required data-wise to meet that need. So in other words, good data is what is required, as Hilary has pointed out, to meet the needs of so many different people. It would appear that lack of data is sadly not allowing the full story to be known, or even, if I might suggest, to be one that is welcomed by the government. So accurate data is therefore key to inform and ultimately ascertain the full picture of what is needed in order to aid anti-trafficking organisations in their work of rescuing and fully supporting those who are trafficked. And so I said I'm going to second and applaud not only this resolution, but all who work to free humanity from slavery. And so what's going on in my sort of Cumbria, my county? I mentioned that there was, in the past, 2007, no, I haven't mentioned it yet, 2007 in the county, there was an initiative to ascertain what was going on. And so what was set up was the collaboration between the police and the churches. And it entailed quite a number of churches who made safe places for victims of trafficking and for rest and shelter and interviewing by the police. So a safe place of welcome and hospitality was actually accorded. Awareness was raised throughout the county by posters in the streets, by talks given by the police in particular, and awareness raising days were organised by the churches. Probably actually elsewhere, but I'm just focusing on the churches here. And quite a number of folks who were trafficked were, as it were, caught, but not always wanting to be rescued. And especially, it would appear, this is going from Reverend Nicola's report to me, because some of them were actually being paid and were sending money home. Many of the folks who were actually trafficked and appeared in Cumbria were from Eastern Europeans, so white and not perhaps easily recognised, because here in Cumbria it's really a very white population. But Workington in particular had folks working in the nail bars, and they were Indian or Chinese. They were also working in car washes, repair shops, farms even, and doing driveways. They would often sleep in vans or had very poor accommodation, as Hilary said. Just also to point out that at that time, the volunteers were not necessarily transporting people, but that was left to those who were official and had more training, because it was actually dangerous, and probably still is dangerous, to be transporting the trafficked people. Nicola went on to say that today, looking at it again, post-COVID wise, she's still involved. She's actually on the police list for them to contact her. But the idea is that the police commissioners should be involved. But there's one big problem. The police budget has been severely cut, and there are far few constables now working, especially on the beat. Once upon a time, they had a beat bobby who would call in once a week to their local centre where people could meet, and now it's only once a month. So this gives you some idea of some of the problems, because the key to some of this is actually the police. Nicola said that every high street has trafficked people, but how do we identify them? And so she pointed me to the newest lady that they have in post. And since the initiative started in Cumbria in 2007 to actually try and raise awareness and identify trafficked people, there have been 3 people employed through Churches Together and the Diocese of Carlisle as part of the Social Responsibility Forum. And at the moment, we have a new lady who was put in post in September. And talking with her, she reiterated what Nicola has said, that the police are key to first-line contact. And relationships with them are still there, which is good to know. Churches are still offering safe spaces and emergency accommodation. But not every person interviewed wants to be saved, as it were, and rescued. And not everybody wants to be referred to the national reference mechanism. I got that referral mechanism, sorry, which, as Hilary told us, logs data of trafficked people. People are frightened, and they're frightened of being deported now. And of course, with Priti Patel wanting to take everyone to Rwanda, that's probably increasing the fear, even though it's not yet happened. Jo said that her concerns are actually for the police funding, because unless the police have funding, they really don't have anybody designated to be part of the system. However, there is a little light in the offing, and she has been told that the Cumbria Police have been promised 2 new posts. Whether that's full-time or somebody just been there to help out, we don't know. But one of the roles will be strategic and one will be practical, which I suppose bodes well for the future. However, it's actually partnerships and working together that have yet to be established, and all is a little bit ad hoc at the moment. Jo reckons that the key factor for success is actually an allocated coordinator. That's on a local level. So to really be encouraging organisations and churches to actually have champions for modern slavery, and they to be, as it were, communicating the message at a local level, but then it all coming together county-wise. Jo herself has the key role in all this, and since September is sitting on lots of groups and forums, not only in the county, but also nationally. She highlighted the need for multi-agency working and really sees it as being invaluable, as it is for domestic abuse victims. And trafficked people also need this setup. Jo is conscious that there is a huge amount of work to be done, both strategically and for raising awareness and training, plus the need for some financial support. How that comes about is actually having the data, isn't it? To actually show what the real need is and how big the problem is. In my hometown of Kendal, we have a Salvation Army church, and they're offering hospitality and safe space, but not for transporting. However, nationally, as Hilary has mentioned, the Salvation Army is quite involved with the government and has held a contract with the government for over 11 years now to actually support survivors. And each year, numbers have been rising. Numbers for 2020-21 were higher than any other year. That's actually really when COVID hit us and there was lockdown. But they had 2,666 recovering survivors. But that doesn't account for all those that were actually referred. Apparently some referrals never reach them. Maybe because maybe because those trafficked don't actually take up that offer, or some of the admin goes wrong and communication falls down. But also some folks, once they're in the support service, actually leave. Also, just to mention that the referrals to the Salvation Army appear to be from partner agencies, which are many. And if you go onto the website for the Army and see their report, you can get a view of how many of them there are. And public awareness is actually vital. And so the Salvation Army, to actually raise this awareness, are using the media more often, and they have events and also training. Now, whether in fact this is situated down south, I rather suspect it is, because I sadly have to admit that I have not been aware of this at all. But it would appear that there's a lot of infrastructure going on regarding this. I'm also aware that the Salvation Army also has undercover agents, and that's all a little bit hush-hush. And they're working to identify and take down the traffickers themselves. It's not just rescuing, it's actually to take down the traffickers. Not an easy task, and quite dangerous too. And so I say again, I second and applaud not only this resolution, but all who work to free humanity, who are in fact God's creatures, aren't they? God's children, from this terrible scourge of slavery.
Thank you, Delphine.
Is that over to you, Elsie?
That was excellent. It sort of brought it home, didn't it? Closer to home. Maureen?
I wanted to thank them both and say that it has made me want to go to our local Salvation Army church and say, is there anything I can do to help? Thank you very much, both of you.
Yes, I've made a couple of notes on the similar line, Maureen.
They might not be afraid of an old white grandma in the same way that they would be afraid of somebody in uniform.
It sounds as if there's not a central database, then, is there? There's a few databases, so it's not collective.
No, it appears that different agencies gather information, but they all do it slightly differently. So when a body like the Office of National Statistics tries to collate all of that information, it doesn't tally. So it's not reliable data, they can't use it.
Well, they could use it, but with that caveat.
Yes, but I think that's not really the way government operates, is it? Is the problem, no, you know, because so much of the emphasis across all of our social services, etc., they're pushing evidence all the time. I mean, certainly it was true in teaching. I know it's true across the police. Everything that you try to report, they're asking evidence, evidence, evidence.
So the under 18s and specific to Barnardo's, which is where they should have a complete database of their referrals.
One hopes. I don't know how reliable that is. And I think the difficulty is that they only know about the ones that they have rescued, and there are many more that are still taking drugs across the county lines but have not yet been identified, and so again that just distorts the picture.
It's this collective data is the whole that isn't being drawn together, so we're not getting the real big picture of it.
That's the big problem. And until we've got accurate and reliable data, it's highly unlikely that the government is actually going to improve the system. and the support for the people who are rescued.
Mm.
I mean, at the moment, adults who are rescued have 45 days to recover. Well, for some of them, 45 days is a drop in the ocean, because it will take them years to be able to give voice to anything about the experiences that they've had.
I'm wondering about what happens in terms of the unreliable data for, particularly in the sex industry, of single women with children. Because if the women get recorded in one place, do the children get recorded with Barnardos, or do they slip through the net?
I honestly don't know. I do know that, I know there are refuges in Southampton, which is near where I live, which within my own church we try to give some support to. And there are refuges there which take in women who've been rescued from trafficking or abuse situations, some of which are pregnant when they're rescued, and others have young children with them. They try to give them counselling and physical and mental support when they're there. The small help that we give is to contribute things like toiletries, night dresses, towels, and they make up welcome bags for them as they arrive at the refuges. And many of the women who end up there can't believe that the bags are for them, because they have never owned anything at all for themselves in their lives.
As much as anything, though, my query or my curiosity was about where they get recorded in the data.
Yeah, I really don't know. The adults will be recorded through the National Referral Mechanism. I assume that the children will be reported to Barnardos. But as far as I'm aware, in most instances, they stay with their mothers.
Yeah.
And after some weeks, when they have begun to settle a little, the refugees tend to move them on to a refuge in another part of the country. So they are taking them out of the situation where they could be seen or caught again by their perpetrators.
So presumably they go into camps. Do they go into refuge camps?
I think initially most of them will go into refuges. I'm not aware of camps as such, okay. but we know that some of the people who come to this country, for example, asylum seekers, end up effectively locked away in what are not much different to prisons.
That's right.
Which again is a pretty unpleasant situation for them to be in when they've already been through significant trauma.
This is what we're hearing up in the northeast, where they've opened up an alternative to Yarlswood for women immigration removal centres, and it's the women haven't committed any crime and they can be released back into the community, but they're isolated. Away from everybody, and from even talking person to person to somebody who can help them, like a lawyer, whereas men get that privilege. The women in Derwent's side in the northeast can only talk to a lawyer on the phone, and what happens if they've got no English? It's horrendous. But I gather women for refugee women are mounting a court case against the Home Office about this, and just hoping that something comes of it. But it's is there such a thing as a toolkit in terms of how to recognize victims? I mean, we can look at nail bars, we can look at car washes, but other symptoms that we might just alert people. Something that's on.
There are charities such as Stop the Traffic produce information leaflets that will give quite a comprehensive list of the things to look out for. Generally speaking, the things that are most obvious are looking where people are working, for example, if they are in a car wash, if they have no appropriate clothing, no protective gear at all, if they are struggling to understand and have no English, if they can't look you in the eye, although that for some cultures, if then it's not a done thing for women particularly to look people in the eye when they meet them, but avoiding eye contact can be quite a significant. The fact that they seem cowed, that there may be, look out for somebody who's watching them, who is their kind of overseer, their master, if you like. Particularly if you see situations sometimes where you see women on the street sitting with children who perhaps have a kind of bohemian look about them, look around and see if there's somebody a little distance away from them who's keeping an eye on them to what they're doing, because they will be taking from those women and children anything that is given to them. Another thing to look out for situations of things like domestic servitude, which can be happening on any of our streets, where people are particularly trapped in houses, and you wouldn't know that they were there, but you might perhaps see a shadow in the dark taking the bin out, or you might see the odd twitch of a curtain when you think there's nobody at home. And so little things to look out for. And once you kind of become aware of some of these things, then you begin to notice them. Can you just reiterate, you mentioned a couple of NGOs. What was the Walk Free Foundation and Stop the Traffic? Are there any more? Oh, there are quite a lot. The antislavery.com are quite a useful organisation. They've been going for a long time now, and they do produce a report periodically, which is quite an interesting little magazine that's worth looking out for, and they will send it to you regularly if you contact them on their website, which is simply antislavery.org. And they will send out a little magazine called A Reporter, I think 3 or 4 times a year, which updates you about things that are going on across the board with human slavery. Yeah, thanks.
Unseen UK, you probably know about this, have videos on YouTube about how to spot modern slavery.
Yes, there are. If you just put into your search engine, Google or whatever, and look for human slavery, you'll find all sorts of things come up.
I think one of the things to remember is that it's not just working class that gets sucked into what we would say, that slavery, it does exist as well in middle class and upper class as well.
Oh,
and
very
usually,
much so.
Very much so. And usually they are nannies. That's one of the things that is highlighted, that they come over believing that they're going to be a nanny in a very good area, in a very good home, and in fact they become slaves to that family.
Yeah, I mean, basically the traffickers are tricksters. They fraud people, trick them into believing that life is going to be better if they follow them, and then when the victims arrive at their destination, all their papers, their evidence of who they are taken from them, and they are basically held as prisoners in many situations.
Yeah, we're hearing about this in Ukraine, aren't we, now?
Yeah. And particularly the women and children who are fleeing from Ukraine are extremely vulnerable to being trafficked at the moment. And over the last couple of years through the pandemic, I think the stress that's been on so many people in lots of different ways has certainly increased the amount of trafficking and the amount of abuse to women and children by as much as 50% in a lot of places.
I read an article in the Sunday Times recently about 2 women with young children fleeing from Ukraine. They were offered a lift by a Danish doctor. And as they were traveling to Poland, they got very suspicious. So they called in, and he called in at a hotel for a coffee, and he asked the manager for help. And the manager said that, that they were not going with him anymore. And he phoned the police and he fled. But it was obviously, there must be a lot of that happening.
Yes. Well, can you imagine what it must be like? I mean, can you imagine being a mother with a child or 2 with you, trying to find somewhere safe, and somebody offers you a hot meal or a lift to a place of sanctuary? Wouldn't you be tempted to take it? And then,
Take it, yeah.
and how do you tell which people you can trust and which people you can't?
I think they sort of became suspicious, thankfully, and sought help, so they were lucky. But there'll be a lot who don't.
So yeah, it's really, really difficult situations, really difficult.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Can I ask a question? I'll make a point. I think in the figures, I spotted that 36% of those that were identified as being trafficked were actually white and in England, UK people. They were British. In that total number.
Yes,
is that correct?
Within Britain itself, yes. But people are trafficked from. A lot of the people are trafficked from Eastern Europe, but we also have people from places like Nigeria, Algeria, lots of other places. So we have Black people who have been trafficked into this country as well. But over the last few years, over the last few years, there's been an increasing number of
countries. We know this because
of cases of people being trafficked within Britain. So there's often a perception that people who are trafficked come from other countries, but actually a lot of the trafficking now in this country is within our own borders of British people.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I was getting at. But we have that classic case only recently, don't we, of somebody in the farming community who had been kept as a slave for years, and that just came to light only relatively recently.
I'm on the border with Lincolnshire, and one of the main problems around here, and I've actually seen evidence of it, was quite disturbing, is the itinerant farm workers, a lot of whom are trafficked. And I still recall driving down one of the lanes in the farm and seeing this trailer ahead of me, and in the back of it was just all these men in yellow jumpsuits. And I realised afterwards it's all like they were American prisoners on the roads. They were trafficked farm workers, and they sleep in the barns. They have no accommodation nowhere. It's appalling.
There was a case in Southampton a little while ago of a car wash place that was closed down, and they discovered that there were, I think it was 6 or 8 men who were taking it in shifts to sleep in one small caravan. So they were sleeping in each other's sheets and had no proper washing facilities, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's unfortunately all too common.
But then unfortunately, some of these are the ones who don't want to report it because they are earning something. They have no rights, have everything taken away, but they are earning something which they're getting back, and they're desperate for the work. And so they're letting themselves be exploited, which is a big problem.
Yeah, yes. They won't be listed on any social services.
No.
They won't be listed anywhere.
No, not at all.
No, they're non-people, really.
Yeah.
And so again, the system is not doing them any service to.
Not robust enough, is that?
No, not at all. I mean, a huge increase of funding needs to happen, and it's not being helped by the cuts to policing, the cuts across all the public services, really. It just, everything is straining. And so there isn't the leeway then to give extra support to people like refugees and migrants and so on who need that help.
Dan, having seen what you did you actually report those guys? Did you report it?
No, I didn't know. Sorry, me. I didn't know who they were. I followed them in the car for some time, and but you know, I think it's far too widespread a problem that.
But did you report it?
Oh, I should have done. But I had no idea who.
Did you report it?
No, I didn't.
It just said she.
But I had no idea where to report it to. I mean, this was a couple of years ago, but it was like seeing a chain gang. It was quite fun.
I mean, one of the problems is knowing where to report these things to.
Where'd you go to?
Because presumably the local authorities, I mean, if these car washers are functioning, nobody is inspecting them or doing anything about them. Presumably the local authorities or the local trading standards people don't have the authority to do it and don't have the money to do it, I mean.
I presume not. It tends to come down to the police or an interested individual. Yeah, right. I mean, I did, I did vaguely ask at a car wash that operates locally, and they just did not want to talk about it. They assured me they had accommodation and everything was fine, and they just did not want to talk about it. So I didn't make any progress and wasn't sure who to report it to, or ask, not necessarily report it, but ask for it to be checked out. Yes, I think I would recommend, if you have suspicions, I mean, when you talk to people who work for the charities that are involved with this work day in, day out, they will nearly always say that your suspicion starts with a gut feeling that something's not quite right. And when you then observe for a little while, if that feeling is then confirmed, then I think, even if it's a suspicion and you don't have evidence, it is worth reporting it. And there is the 0800 number. And as I say, many of the charities will have an app or an online facility, and you can report directly to the National Referral Mechanism.
Right.
So you can look that up online, and for many of the charities lines that you can just put forward something that is concerning you, and then the authorities will investigate. So you don't have to be involved in it. You don't have to be frightened of reporting it, because once you've reported your suspicion, then other people will take it on and investigate whether there's any substance to it.
You've certainly given us plenty of contact information, Hilary. Thank you very much. And Gail, I think we can do something with Darlington branch, don't you?
Yes, at some point. It would be interesting. I mean, if we could find a local speaker on the subject would be good, because we're starting to think about our next programme of speakers.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Hilary and Delphine, for your contribution. It's a pleasure to work with you both. And to the audience, I would say, please, if you have any questions that come up, you think about them tomorrow, next day, next week, or anything that you think we could give you a platform to help to highlight this issue or any other issue for that matter, please get in touch with the office, and we'll see what we can do. And again, thank you, Hilary, for joining in with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Hilary.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Hilary.
Hilary.
Thanks.
Lovely.
Bye.